start looking line by line at it that way. The testimony of the Bible authenticating itself is a circular argument and fallacious. Saying that we all intuitively know life has meaning is not a valid way of knowing that something is a fact. If you guys are interested in why I say that, I'll have more time to do the question and answer part to talk about intuitive knowledge. To say that if there is no God, there is no meaning or purpose, completely ignores all sorts of other philosophies as far as existentialism and making your own meaning. And I also think this thing about saying that, like his example of the trained professionals and the firemen, the people who wrote the New Testament did not know Jesus personally, had never met him, were living at least 50 years later, if not more than that. They were not trained professionals in what Jesus said. It doesn't mean they were necessarily wrong, but it would be a huge coincidence if they happened to get it exactly right, having never heard him in person as far as we can determine. That's all I have time for right now, so I'll turn it back over to Jed.
Of course, before I read the Bible, I'd always heard that the Bible is filled with contradictions. I used to tell people that before I read it. And, but what amazed me when I read the Bible and really studied it and read it through, it's continuity and unity. Most of what Jesus said was not new to him. One of the most frequent expressions we find in Jesus' speeches would be, it is written, and he would quote the Torah or quote the prophets. Peter wrote much of the Bible, New Testament. Peter was one of his disciples. Matthew and John were both his disciples. I don't think we can assume that they were illiterate because they were fishermen. Maybe they didn't know how to learn to read or write. Maybe they learned after they became converted. That is certainly a possibility. But even if they could not write, you know, a person might dictate what he wants written to someone else. Dictate a book. Well, he would still get credit for the book as the author, even though someone else actually wrote it down. A few of the points they've made, I don't think the Bible does absolutely forbid divorce. I think there are grounds for the divorce in the Bible in the case of adultery or desertion. Granted, that is a matter of interpretation. There are Christians who are flat against divorce for any cause and are convinced that it is against the teachings of the Bible. As for Galileo and Copernicus, you know, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says the earth is the center of the universe. But that was the scientific thinking of the time. And Galileo, Copernicus, they were going against most of the scientific thought at the time, which the church went along with. I'm not a scientist by training, but I do know something about the development of scientific thought. You know, much of what people believe to be scientifically factual a few centuries ago, we look back on today and we kind of wonder, well, how could those people have believed that? I suspect some of the, what Dave and I both might consider valid science, 200 years in the future, people will look back on us and say, how could they have believed that? Now, the Bible is not essentially a science book. Science deals with the studying physical phenomena, studying the physical world. God is a metaphysical being. Meta means beyond. God exists beyond the physical. So we don't touch God. We don't see God, or at least most of us haven't. Some might have had a special revelation, which the Lord has appeared to them, but that's not unusual. Ultimately, we do put our faith in the Bible, which is the revelation of God to men. God himself is the logic. He is the reason. In the beginning was the Word. That the Greek term there is logos. It can also be interpreted the logic. So God is the logic. He is the beginning point. You know, the laws of logic are very real, but the laws of logic aren't something you can see. They're not something you can taste. They're not something you can smell. Yet we all know that the laws of logic are there. We need to think this thing through. Well, Isaiah the prophet said, "Come, let us reason together. Though your sins be as scarlet, they can be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they can be white as wool." I believe when we're thinking straight, when we're thinking logically, our thoughts will inevitably lead us to God. And if our thoughts have led us away from God into doubt in our belief, there is some faultiness in our thinking, faultiness in our logic.
Thanks, Jed. Okay. Well, I've read the Bible. It is completely full of contradictions. I don't mean completely as in, every single sentence has one, but I mean if you read it, there are a lot. Some of them are irreconcilable. For example, two of the different gospel authors make claims about what day Jesus died that contradict each other. Obviously, those cannot both be correct. There are several others like that. As far as getting credit as the author and saying that those people, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were the writers, we have no idea who wrote those books. They were assigned those names hundreds of years later. The earliest records that we have of those books are not from the time they were supposed to have been written, and they are fragmentary. They've been pieced back together over time, mostly by guesswork. We find something, we guess who the author is based on the style, based on the vocabulary. There's a lot of very technical linguistics that are involved, comparative linguistics type of stuff. But it's a lot of guesswork, and if you ask New Testament scholars about this, the people who look at these things that archaeologists find, they'll tell you, we really don't know. And the church basically got together, and you can look this up in any history book, and voted to say which gospels that we found that have been in circulation, that are untitled, that have no author attributed to them, which of these should we consider to be an actual part of the Bible, and which ones should we not? There were rival churches, each had their own gospel, each their own story about Jesus and who he was. There are other gospels that are not included in the Bible because they weren't voted in. They are no less historically credible than the ones that were necessarily. The names were added later is pretty much the point that I want to make. We don't know who wrote them. We do know that the author of the book that we call the Gospel According to Mark was the first one written because Matthew and Luke and John borrow from that, Matthew and Luke mostly. We know it was written at least 40 years or so after Jesus died, because it mentions in it the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which happened in AD 70.